Melbourne's second wave lockdown prevents me from travelling overseas for Dateline.
No, you can't have my phone. All right, take my phone. Take my phone.
Cooped up at home instead, I've been puzzling over the saga of the ship named after Australian mountaineer Greg Mortimer.
Buenos dias, Dr. Rando.
Buenos dias. Hello, how are you?
The Greg Mortimer was like a microcosm of the pandemic, where everyone experiences the same events differently.
Hi.
We're having
here
a
we are.
wonderful day out in
At the Antarctica.
For some, the virus threatened their vacation. For others, their livelihood, or even their life. Our story begins on the 15th of March in Ushuaia, on the southern tip of Latin America. 4 days after the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic. The plan was to set off that afternoon, crossing the Drake Passage to the Antarctic Peninsula, then to South Georgia, the Falklands, and back to Argentina.
For me, was a completely surprise in the moment that the new group of passengers came on board. My name is Mauricio Usme. I'm the emergency medical doctor in Medellin, Colombia, and also I was the medical officer on board of the Greg Mortimer ship. March 11, the World Health Organization gave the alert about the pandemic condition regarding the coronavirus. That's mean for us that we are under risk with the new embarkation. The new passengers, maybe someone is sick, and these people will bring the virus on board for us.
Empezamos un crucero que no debió hacerse nunca, porque ya estaba todo encendido.
Angela Gavilan is also Colombian, but lives in Chile. She's worked on cruise ships for more than 14 years as a maid.
Otras compañías ya habían parado sus operaciones. Mi esposo también trabaja en cruceros. Ellos pararon antes, empezaron a hacer cuarentena mucho antes de la alerta mundial. No hubo ni un solo caso de coronavirus a bordo de su barco y todos se fueron muy felices a sus casas, mientras nosotros empezamos una odisea el 15 de marzo.
While many crew members were afraid of the trip going ahead, some of the passengers were afraid it wouldn't.
I'm Anthony Phillip. I live in Sydney. I used to fly for 20 years as a long-haul flight attendant, and I've travelled to over 170 countries and territories.
So how are you feeling about the decision to embark on another international holiday when coronavirus was obviously affecting some parts of the world?
Not unconcerned and not unaware, but not believing that there was any inherent danger about what I was about to embark on. On the 15th of March, we had a pre-trip briefing hosted by the Managing Director of Aurora Expeditions. And he assured us that it was without doubt the safest place on the planet to be. There was no corona whatsoever.
I would have been disappointed had it not gone ahead, because I'd been anticipating this life dream for some time and really looking forward to it.
Graham Paget is a retired surgeon from Denmark, West Australia, who had a lifelong dream of walking with penguins. He booked a cabin on the Greg Mortimer with his wife, Rose, who was also celebrating her 75th birthday.
There were several in our party who were very concerned that the trip was going ahead, and they had expressed these misgivings to the management of the trip, but they were told that it was going to go ahead, and if they chose to pull out, then there would be no refund or recourse.
The Greg Mortimer was the last cruise ship to leave Ushuaia.
I remember being overwhelmed with excitement. I was pinching myself. It was just truly such a remarkable experience to be pushing back from the port of Ushuaia, embarking on this trip that I had hoped to accomplish many, many years ago, and now it was actually happening.
Tell me about the first night.
Yes, we had a party for Rose because it was her birthday, and also from one of the other guys from Denmark. So it was a joint birthday party and good celebration.
How does it feel looking back on that now?
To be honest, I can't remember much about it. The events that followed on from that have just shadowed over it, I'm afraid, for me.
The first sign that the Greg Mortimer might be in trouble came just hours after it set off, when Argentina's president made a live televised address.
Así hemos tomado la decisión de que durante los próximos 15 días vamos a cerrar las fronteras y nadie podrá ingresar a la Argentina.
Their route back was now blocked.
It was almost like the trap was already sprung. This was already my feeling of, oh dear, you know, this could not go well. My name's Jeff Green. I live in New Zealand and I was the expedition doctor on the Greg Mortimer. It clearly was that we're going to have to find a plan B straight away. So we were going to do a trip to the peninsula and then we were going to fly out from the Falklands back home.
It was a few more days before passengers were told of the plan to cut the trip short and leave from the Falklands. They felt that everything possible was being done to ensure their safety.
There were sanitising stations everywhere to clean your hands. They kept reminding us that this was necessary. Before going in to eat in the dining room, they literally had a staff member watch us wash our hands with soap and water. There were staff perpetually cleaning banisters, handrails, all the kind of touch points that one would expect. It was a very proactive approach to trying to stop something before it started.
Siempre sentía de esa incertidumbre en hacer mi trabajo rápido, protegerme lo más que pudiera y siempre pensar de espero que no tenga nadie el virus, espero que mis pasajeros estén sanos.
Many of the crew were frightened of the passengers, who they regarded as a source of possible infection.
Siempre estuvo ese miedo de... Es como una intuición, cuando tienes una intuición de que no quieres ver algo, pero está ahí.
On the 18th, we arrived early morning to be surrounded by glaciers and icebergs, and it was just it was gobsmackingly beautiful. It was so pristine. The colour of the light, I sound really like whacked, but it was like nothing else I'd ever seen. Everybody was running around, clicking away, whether it was an iPhone or a big SLR. They were videoing, everybody was oohing and ahhing.
We could just see these wonderful animals doing their thing in spite of us. They weren't perturbed by us at all. It was just beautiful. One of my pictures was of a seal that was swimming just alongside the Zodiac. He popped up and looked at me, and I got a close-up shot of him sort of saying, "Hello, who are you?"
You're seeing things that are just gobsmacking. So the mood was great. It was always that feeling that we were the lucky ones. Everyone we knew back on planet Earth was going into an increasingly meltdown situation. But at that moment, we felt that we were in this great little bubble of purity.
What happened to change all that?
I already started noticing more people coughing and sneezing in the talks, and I was already, what if, you know. So I repeated my hygiene talk, But then on the afternoon of that day, one of the passengers came up to me and said, I'd like you to come and see my wife or my partner. She's got a fever. It was, it's high enough to be significant. So I immediately went and told Maurizio, who was the ship's doctor and actually had the sort of legal, medical responsibility for the whole boat. And we went together. This was like, so close. I mean, I must admit what went through my mind was, and so it starts.
Jeff called me about one passenger reporting maybe fever. The protocol was very clear. We need to put under isolation all the ship until we can rule out if we have or not COVID-19.
We were informed in the morning that we were required to stay inside our cabins. There was no talk that it was COVID. It was just somebody had shown a higher temperature reading. But they said to take necessary precautions. We're going to keep you all apart from each other and all services meals would be delivered to us.
Así que estos días se incrementó mucho el trabajo, se incrementó obviamente la presión y también la preocupación, porque ya esto ya no estaba, era un crucero de vacaciones, ya todos los pasajeros estaban encerrados y nosotros estábamos cuidando de ellos.
We would go into full PPE and Maurizio and I would then go and we'd divided up the different decks and we would work our way through and we'd record all of the temperatures, obviously looking for anyone spiking other fevers. And we had a couple of days where really it just seemed like maybe this is just one person, maybe this is just a one-off, but because of that one fever already, it meant that the Falklands wasn't going to happen.
No fuimos recibidos por Malvinas, tuvimos que seguir nuestra ruta incierta, no teníamos un destino claro.
What happens now is that we change to plan C when we start heading off to Montevideo. So that's when we start getting more rolling fevers.
March 23, 3 patients with fever. March 24, 5 patients with fever. In the moment that we did reach Uruguay, we had minimum 10 people with fever.
Their new destination, Plan C, was Montevideo, the capital of Uruguay and the closest major port. But at a time when cruise ships were being turned away from ports around the world, no one was sure what kind of welcome they would receive there.
I was now wondering if we would be allowed to disembark with people with a temperature.
As head doctor, Maurizio Usme found himself responsible for the health of more than 200 people on a ship that probably had a deadly virus on board. But if he was expecting support from the ship's owners, he was disappointed.
I wish to make it clear to you that if you do not provide me with the information I require and follow my direction, you will never work for us again.
South African-born entrepreneur Glenn Hafer is also a registered doctor and was medical consultant to P&O Cruises for 15 years. Hafer bought a stake in Aurora when well-known mountaineer Greg Mortimer stepped back from the company he'd founded. We approached Glenn Hafer and Aurora for an interview, but they declined.
I cannot understand why this person sent me this email in this very rude tone and threatening me. I was very disappointed. I was feeling that maybe I have not the support, the support from the company.
Dr. Usme is one of the best doctors I've ever worked with. He was under enormous pressure. He was really the man in the middle. He was shouldering the entire responsibility and care of the ship.
As the ship sailed towards Uruguay, there was public outcry in Sydney over passengers who'd been allowed to disembark from the Ruby Princess less than a week earlier. 900 people would end up with COVID-19, and 28 people died as a result. Dr. Usme thought it was his duty to include as much detail as possible on the health declaration for the Uruguayan authorities. Dr. Usme said that those on board the Greg Mortimer had been quarantined and that COVID-19 needed to be ruled out. But Glenn Hafer was worried about whether they'd be allowed to disembark.
The risk we carry is public outcry and wharfside workers refusing to allow the ship to berth and allow passengers to disembark. Please bear in mind that how you write the health declaration will influence the way that this is viewed. We don't know we have COVID-19. We are taking precautions as if we do. Give limited information truthfully.
Hola, Capitán. Hola, señor.
In a recording made by Dr. Usme on the 23rd of March, the ship's captain said he didn't believe the ship was in quarantine.
The ship is not under quarantine. That is clear. No, the ship is under quarantine. No, it's not. Yes. No. Yes.
And I told to the captain, I'm never going to change the health declaration because the health declaration for Uruguay is showing the real situation on board.
He's a very moral person. He's got a very profound, unshakable moral integrity. And he kind of is almost a bit old school, that he works out of medicine as a calling, as a vocation, rather than a job. And that became clear as I worked with him.
You know, I was very confused. In this moment, my feeling was I'm alone. Nobody is helping me here.
Aurora Expeditions disagrees with Dr. Usme. In response, they said the highly selective leaking of communications may serve the frustrations and agendas of individual parties, but does not reflect the facts.
So what happens as you approach Uruguay? Are you able to dock in Montevideo?
No, not at all. And in fact, the whole of the Rio de la Plata was full of ships in our situation. We were basically moored 20k off of Montevideo.
So far, everyone who was sick only had mild symptoms. But Dr. Green was afraid of what would happen if that changed and they needed access to a hospital.
At that stage, I was doing the maths. If it was COVID and we had a population of 200 people, that could mean 20 to 40 people getting really sick.
Given what was happening in hospitals in northern Italy at the time, you must have dreaded that possibility.
Absolutely. You know, I'd already kind of followed and heard from doctors and nurses working in that situation. It was like a war zone, you know, and I kind of at that stage didn't know if that wasn't going to be reproduced in our situation.
Soon enough, the doctors were confronted with their first seriously ill patient, Sydney physiotherapist Carl Scher. A photo records the moment that Dr. Usme calls for help from the bridge.
It was our test case. Basically, we approached the hospitals in Uruguay and Montevideo, and then luckily the British hospital accepted this patient, and within hours we were getting a Coast Guard out and the famous transfer of our first patient occurred.
Scher was taken to the British hospital and intubated.
Then at 1 o'clock in the morning, I get a kind of repeated, relentless knocking at my door, and I get out of bed, and I got a message from the captain via a crew member that I had to go and see Maurizio. So I went and saw him, and he was spiking a horrendous fever.
I remember I have a lot of body pain, discomfort. Immediately I know that I have coronavirus also. And I was in my cabin in isolation immediately. That means Dr. Jess was the doctor now with the responsibilities on board.
Yeah, I feel this huge weight now has landed on my shoulders. Not only am I last man standing, but also it's clear that it's COVID. So I just really, that's like darkest hour stuff, really.
The Greg Mortimer cruise ship was anchored off the coast of Uruguay with 217 passengers and crew on board, many of them Australian. Some had symptoms of COVID-19. Around the same time the first passenger was being evacuated from the ship, cabin maid Angela Gavilan also received bad news.
Pero cuando él me dijo que yo tenía fiebre, fue un golpe muy fuerte. Ese mismo día me empecé a sentir mal, empecé a sentir mucho dolor de cabeza. Al día siguiente sentía mucho dolor en mi cuerpo, no me quería parar de mi cama, mi compañera tenía mucha fiebre y era un enfermo cuidando a otro porque me preocupaba muchísimo ella porque su fiebre no bajaba.
The passengers and crew both faced the same threat, but they weren't really in it together.
It's a thing of beauty, isn't it?
Passengers could stave off cabin fever with exercise and imagination.
Okay, he thinks he's going to get it, but it's not lawn bowls, Danny, remember that.
Life was different downstairs.
Mi compañera estaba en la cama de abajo y yo estaba en la cama de arriba. Son espacios muy reducidos, son espacios sin luz natural. Los camarotes de los pasajeros, por supuesto que son muy lujosos, amplios, con balcón, con mucha luz. Para el crew es normal siempre los cuartos estar bajo la línea de agua, o sea, era muy difícil estar ahí adentro porque nunca sabíamos qué pasaba, si era de día o de noche.
Tell me what happened when Rose got sick.
Yeah, it was just another day in our confined to cabin, and Rose had developed this slightly irritating cough that wouldn't go away. I thought that I ought to let Jeff Green know.
The doctor?
Yeah. He examined Rose, listened to her chest, and was sufficiently worried to put her on some oxygen.
Because she had some of those comorbidity things, we were still looking at people of risk, and she was older, and it just meant that things could go pear-shaped more quickly. The next morning I went in to follow up, and there were more signs of concern. And at that stage I really felt more than anyone she needed to be evacuated.
They came down and dressed her in full PPE stuff as well, and she was on an oxygen mask at that stage, which helped her cough, and I was reassured by that. And so they got a wheelchair and popped her in the wheelchair, and that's the last I saw of her. She just disappeared.
Rose Paget was the second passenger evacuated from the Greg Mortimer. She was also taken to the British hospital in Montevideo. A few days later, Graham got a phone call to say she'd been intubated. It was just the beginning of the bad news he would receive from the hospital.
I still look back on that with dread, because I can distinctly remember thinking to myself, what the hell do I do in this country where I don't speak a word of Spanish, and I get a message from ICU that, sorry, we've done our best, but it didn't work and she's passed away.
If Graham was going to see Rose before it was too late, he'd need a helping hand from Uruguay.
Dr. Karina Rando. I am the General Director of Coordination of the Ministry of Health. We could not continue going one by one to pick up every sick patient. We started to be worried because the boat was big. There was a lot of people on board. We need to do something bigger. We arranged that we were going to go to the boat and check every patient and decide what to do after that.
Watching people come on board, the doctors in full PPE, made me realise the actual severity of our situation. It was actually quite shocking and quite spooky. It was like, oh my goodness, and this is us. They really believe we are infected.
All the passengers and crew were tested for coronavirus. When the results came back, they took everyone by surprise.
They said that at the moment there was 60% positive on the boat. So this was like out of the ballpark. I mean, I thought that maybe like 20%. So you're on this ship and you realise that you're in a kind of COVID incubator, that you're actually on a floating petri dish, really.
What did you think when you got the test results back?
Well, we think, Houston, we have a problem.
Next week, the story continues.
We have to do something. These people cannot stay in that boat for longer.
Uruguay mounts a rescue operation for the passengers on the Greg Mortimer.
You know, we're sort of like, in the worst possible way, celebrities for all the wrong reasons.
But the crew feel abandoned.
People, very clear, they told, we want John from the ship. I'm feeling like that I'm gonna die on board.
And tragically, one of those on board would never make it home.
Saturday na siya tumawag, nasa ospital na siya, meron na siyang ano. After that, hindi na, wala na kaming video call.
And I couldn't say goodbye because there's a bloody window there, and I couldn't touch her. I couldn't